25 years ago, I had just moved into a house in Honolulu on Punch Bowl Crater, known to the Hawaiian people as Pu'awaina. Just on the other side of the ridge from my house was the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. And I had known about the cemetery there for many years, but since I was actually living on the crater, I kind of made it a practice just to wander through the cemetery as often as I could. And it was a rather meaningful experience for me to walk through and see all those graves and knowing that so many people fought for our country, for many of the privileges and freedoms that we often take for granted. I remember all the times walking through and going up to the platform where you can look over and see most of Honolulu. You can see way past Diamond Head, and you can actually see Pearl Harbor from there. And many times I would just go up there and look around and reflect and think about what it was like on December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed. Clear view of the whole harbor from there. I also would look down towards Honolulu and think about what it was like when my father moved there right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He was a senior in high school and just 17 years old at the time, and by the time he had turned 18, or within a month or so after that, he had moved to Honolulu back when the largest buildings, I think in all of Hawaii, were the Moana and the Royal Hawaiian Hotels. It was just amazing being up there, just trying to picture Honolulu looking like that. But most importantly, it was a time for me to reflect on the past and think about what had happened in the past and what Punch Bowl represented. It was basically after World War II, there were so many bodies of veterans in the Pacific Basin, they needed another cemetery in the Pacific to bury them, so they created the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. That was kind of a pattern. At least once a week, I would just wander through. It was just right around the corner from where I lived. But I will tell you that there was nothing that prepared me for the experience of being there on December 7th, 1991. It was the 50th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And normally there would be a few people that I could see at any one time. But on December 7th, it was packed. There were so many people all over the place. There was hundreds of veterans, many who were there during World War II, many who were there at Pearl Harbor. And I believe that many of them had gone back to the mainland where they were from, got married, raised a family, had grandchildren. And for many, it was their first time back to Honolulu since the war's end. And I think for most, it was the first time they had actually been to Punch Bowl Cemetery. And I would have to say, I'm pretty sure that for every single one of them, it was a spiritual experience. I think just walking amongst all the graves and thinking back about what had happened when they were in Honolulu in 1941 must have just opened up all kinds of memories for them. It really was a somber experience. People didn't talk very much on that day. They wandered around in silence, and when they did talk, they seemed to whisper. There was just something very, very special about that particular day and being there. I will never forget, for as long as I live, the feeling that I had with the chicken skin on my arms, walking around, seeing all these men, for the most part, who were in their 70s at the time, and maybe 80s, just walking around with a sense of awe and wonder. And today, as we celebrate the ending of the war, but also as we remember and commemorate the bombing of Pearl Harbor, it occurred to me that there is much to be learned from our past experiences. So I decided a few days ago just to Google World War II and just look at some facts and reminders and some statistics. And I thought I would just share with you some of the statistics that I came across. Of course, 60 million people died during World War II. the most tragic war of human history. More people died in the war or as a result of the war than any other war in history. And here are some of the statistics. Actually, that's probably a conservative figure. Nobody knows for sure exactly how many died during World War II. Some people say it could be 80 million or even more. But a few of the statistics that I came across, 26 million people died in the Soviet Union alone. That's just mind-boggling to me. In China, over 15 million people died. In Poland, 6 million people died, which doesn't seem nearly as big as Soviet Union or China, but 17% of the population at the beginning of the war died during the war. And as far as I could tell, if I looked at all the charts correctly, that was the highest statistic per capita, Poland. And then, of course, we all know that European Jews, 6 million at least, died during the Holocaust, during the entire World War II. And that represents, according to some, 75 to 80% of all European Jews living in Europe at the beginning of the war. Mind-boggling to me how much death happened. And then when you add on top of that all of the suffering and all of the hunger and everything else, it's beyond mind-boggling. And then I read about the end of the war and how when Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, at least 130,000 people died as a result of just those 2 bombs. And then something I didn't know before or had forgotten, even before the dropping of the 2 bombs, the United States had firebombed over 100 cities and towns in Japan, and in one of those operations alone, which took 2 days, over 100,000 people lost their lives. And that was the firebombing in Tokyo leading up to the dropping of the atomic bombs. Just thinking about this has a truly sombering effect on me. And as I knew that we were going to light the candle of peace today, I had to think about what does that really mean for us as a country as we commemorate Pearl Harbor on Wednesday, as we remember what happened 75 years ago and how that one act basically forced our hand into being a part, as a country, of World War II. World War II came 21 years after the ending of World War I, the war that was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. I also Googled what has happened since World War II. And I was amazed that every single year since World War II, there has been armed conflict throughout the world, and more than one. And then I thought, I wonder what's happening today. So I Googled something like Armed Conflicts 2016 and learned that there have been 50 armed conflicts in the world just this year, in the first 10 months, basically. Over 75,000 people have died in warfare in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan alone this year. And so far, there are as many Syrians who have died in the current civil war as all Americans who died in World War II. Over 400,000. Every year in December, we sing about peace on earth. Every time we sing, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And we also read about peace and Jesus being our Prince of Peace. And this week, I spent some time just reflecting, what does that mean for us in a world where we have already experienced 50 examples or situations of armed conflict? I think World War II and Pearl Harbor has special significance for me because I've been to Pearl Harbor and I used to live on Punch Bowl Crater, and my father fought all over the Pacific Basin during the war and saw the horrors of war. But I also had to just realize and admit this week that that's just one of many, many, many wars throughout the world, and there are many that are still going on today. I was thinking about our Old Testament lesson from Isaiah and how those words that we hear so often, the dream of Isaiah where the people will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks, and nation will no longer raise a sword against another nation, and they will learn war no more. And as I read that over and over this week, I thought, when? When is this going to happen? How is this even possible? Or is it just that, a dream, that really we should say, that's just the way people are? And as I read through Isaiah and thought about when and how, and is this even possible, I also thought, and who is going to show us the way? Who will prepare the way for us? Who will point the way? And over 2,000 years ago, as we learned in this morning's gospel reading from Matthew, it was John the Baptist that pointed the way for Jesus and basically said, I am the one, I am the voice crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Who will show us the way today? We know that after John the Baptist, he prepared the way for Jesus, and Jesus came on the scene and taught people about peace on earth and forgiving people who hurt you and loving your neighbors and widening the circle and including the people that are the strangers, the people who no one else is including or inviting into their circles, and looking way out to the margins of society and saying, you matter to us. Jesus is the one who showed us. John the Baptist prepared the way back then, but who will prepare the way today? I reread the story this week of Sadako in Japan. She was a little girl, Sadako Sasaki, who was in Hiroshima about a little over a mile away, I think 1.2 miles away from Ground Zero, where the first atomic blast happened. And when that happened, her body was lifted up off the ground, her 2-year-old body, and thrown out the window, and her mother went looking for her. And when she found her, she was so relieved because it looked like she was okay. And then less than 10 years later, she started developing lumps around her neck and other parts of her body, and it was determined that she had leukemia that was a result from the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. So she went to the hospital to die. And one of her friends told her the story of 1,000 cranes. And they said, you know, the legend says that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you can ask for anything you want, and it will be granted to you. So Sadako began folding her first paper crane, wishing for peace in the world. And then another one, and she was determined to fold 1,000 paper cranes for peace. And she told everybody about it. She was running out of paper, so people started bringing her paper so she could complete her project. And unfortunately, she died after she folded 644 paper cranes. Her friends were so moved by this act of peace, by this dying girl. They finished her work for her. They folded the rest of the 1,000 cranes in her honor and in her memory. And now the story has gone viral all over the world, and we all know about the 1,000 paper cranes and the story of Sadako Sasaki. It reminded me that everybody can do something for peace. If a girl dying in a hospital bed because of a bomb can keep folding cranes for peace, certainly I can do something for peace. It is not just a dream. It is not just a vision that may or may not happen. It's a dream and a commitment that we all have to be a part of. A couple days ago, I was reading, this may have been yesterday morning actually, I was reading on Facebook about a friend who was visiting in Florida, and she had gone to breakfast at the hotel restaurant. And at a table nearby, there were four older white men, as she described them, who were saying just horribly racist comments very loudly for everybody around them to hear, including the young African American waitress who was serving them with dignity and with grace. And my friend was just horrified by not only the fact of their attitudes, but also that they didn't seem to care that this person that they were criticizing so horribly happened to be serving them, or else they just wanted to rub it in. She wrote in her post that she was angry. And when the young African American woman came over to her table, she said, "They happen to be white and I happen to be white. But I just want you to know, I'm not a part of that plan. I disagree with their ideas and their views, and I'm so sorry that you had to listen to that." And then, now this isn't like her, but she said, "And I'll tell you," she's still talking to the waitress, "when I heard them saying some of those hateful, racist things, I just wanted to walk over there and slap them upside the head." Then she thought, well, why add fuel to the fire? But the waitress laughed and said some really good things. And I actually wrote them down because I thought it would be good for us to hear what this 20-something-year-old African-American waitress said to my friend. She said, "You know, one day, all of this hate will finally die out. It doesn't bring life. It cannot survive the long term." And then my friend responded, "Well, I kind of hoped it might die before I do." And then the waitress said, "Well, that's probably a bit too soon. But I have hope," she went on to say. "Hate has no life of its own. Another generation or two, it will die." And then she went on and said these profound words, "In the meanwhile, we work for our communities. We love our families. We care for our neighbors. We celebrate life. And them," she pointed to the four men that were saying the racist things, "they are a last of a dying world." And as she spoke to my friend, her back straightened, her eyes glowed, passion filled her voice, and she said, "It is really nice, however, that a white lady like you noticed how awful they are. Thank you. We all need to pay attention and to do our part." And I thought that was such a beautiful story for us as we celebrate peace today. I found that it encouraged me, it inspired me, and it gave me more of a sense of commitment to do my part in my community, in my church, in my family, and in my world. And as I remember and think about this story, and also the story of Sadako Sasaki, I think that every one of us, it doesn't matter what our abilities or inabilities are, and it doesn't matter what our age is, it doesn't matter what color skin we have, every single one of us can do something for peace today. And as we prepare for Holy Communion, I invite you to think about what that would be for you. Amen.